Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. And firstly, I'd like to ask if there are any pecuniary interests. Seeing none, we will go for the adoption of the agenda. Moved by David Mackay, seconded by Kathy Rieger. Be it resolved that the Council and Committee of the Township of Whitewater Region adopts the agenda for the June 22nd, 2016 meeting. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, we're going to do the economic development. We've got two agreements to discuss involving MTO turning lanes. Do I give it to Doug? Do you speak on this? Nope. Christine? Sorry. Christine, you speak on this?
Well, Doug, I'll probably need you to chime in as well if you want to just get the mic ready. Unfortunately, Steve Webster, our engineer with JP2G, isn't able to attend tonight. He had a prior commitment that he couldn't get out of. So first of all, the process is a little bit different. We have been working with MTO and with our lawyer, Janet Bradley, and with JP2G, or with J.L. Richards' lawyer, BEI's consultants out of Ottawa, to try and get the MTO agreement. It's been circulating around all of these offices for a few weeks now. And we finally arrived at an agreement that everyone seems to feel has what they need in it and adequately protects the township. The upshot being that BEI is responsible to build this turning lane to MTO's satisfaction, and that MTO needs to sign off on it once it's completed, as you agreed in the resolution from last November, before the brewery gets an occupancy permit. And one thing you need to consider, Mr. Pacheco, I believe his last name is, at MTO, was explaining to me that it absolutely has to be that way, because if, no?
It's on silent, but it still buzzes a little. Sorry, it'll go away.
Okay. The upshot being that if the brewery was ever open for business before MTO had signed off on the turning lane and there was an accident, MTO would be liable legally. So, in any event, what Janet Bradley, what our lawyers suggested, because both of these agreements, the MTO turning lane and the site plan agreement, are both very time sensitive for this project to move along. So she suggested something that is doable. It's a little unconventional, but there's nothing wrong with the process of passing the two bylaws tonight and signing up the MTO agreement, which is ready to go, so that we can get that paperwork shuffled off to MTO's lawyers and that we can progress towards getting the turning lane done. The site plan agreement, the second agreement, is not ready yet. It's still in draft form. There are a number of outstanding items that BEI still has to provide. I spoke with Matt Naismith today. They know exactly what they have to do. They're in the process of doing it. So everything's percolating along. Doug, maybe you've got some comments about either agreement?
No, I think you're doing a good job, Christine. It's been quite of a process the last week or week and a half, dealing with lawyers and MTO and trying to get this in place. Seemingly on the agreement with the MTO, everybody's in agreement now, and so I think let's get this thing going.
And all of the drawings for the MTO turning lane are over there. They're all multiple sets of the same set of drawings from J.L. Richards, if anyone wanted to review any of them. And I guess, not being an engineer and knowing that much about road building, if there are any significant questions or concerns and you're not ready to sign up the MTO agreement tonight, what I'll have to do is make note of those and get them to Steve Webster, and then he'll respond, but that would probably require us scheduling another meeting. So that's where all of that stands.
Okay, Councillor Olmsted, please.
Just a question for Doug. Take me through the steps of a occupancy permit. So, my understanding from Christine that one would not be given to BEI or Whitewater Brewing until all this work is completed?
That's the agreement that we had signed with MTO a while ago that said an interim agreement, I guess, for them to go ahead with this left-hand turning lane and approve of them even going ahead with the construction before the permits and the agreements were all in place. So we entered into agreement saying that the left-hand turning lane had to be completed before occupancy could be allowed. This building could be ready as far as occupancy before that, but the agreement kind of ties our hands to what we can do.
Okay, so just a second part of that question.
Yeah, carry on.
So just the second part of that question is it just the township that issues that permit, or is it the township in conjunction with MTO that issues that occupancy permit?
The township would issue the occupancy permit.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
And just to be clear, the agreement with MTO is for between just us and MTO for the construction of the turning lane, and it states that we are constructing the turning lane, and then the agreement between BEI and the township states that they are in fact doing the turning lane and covering all the costs.
That's part of what we were going back and forth with our lawyer, is getting all of that language mirrored in the site plan agreement as well. So the MTO agreement basically talks about the standards that the road is to be constructed to, and this is unusual because the owner of the property is also the contractor. So the actual tender document talks about construction of left turn lane into the Cobden Brewery, I wish they hadn't called it that, and Wallace Drive from Highway 17. But the language in all of these is that the agreement is between MTO and the township, but BEI is doing the construction, and MTO will sign off on the construction before the township issues the occupancy permit.
Right. But BEI is paying for the construction.
Correct. And all of that language is mirrored.
Is in the agreement between BEI and Whitewater.
Correct.
Yep.
And it's also mirrored then in the site plan agreement. And that's part of why that's still under construction, because we had to go back and forth on that just to make sure that every I was dotted and every T was crossed in terms of protecting the township.
Perfect.
Any other questions? Okay, to move on, I feel we should finish this up. We've determined that there's probably very little risk to the township, and it would help if we speed it along, right, Doug?
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay, so, Christine?
So we have a separate council meeting. This is just a process matter, that bylaws get passed at regular council. So as soon as we're finished tonight, if we can slip into a quick regular meeting, both bylaws are ready to be signed. We can sign the MTO, and I can get BEI in here first thing in the morning to get their signatures on it and get that moving on down the road. And then the onus now is on BEI to make sure that our engineer and lawyer get all the bits and pieces, registered plans, etc. They're aware of all of them, and as soon as those happen, then the head of council and I can sign up the site plan agreement and, really get things. We're doing absolutely the best we can to move this along, but, without creating any undue hazard or liability for the township.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
And just for clarification, so we're going to pass the one bylaw, which is to deal with the the turning lane or the MTO, is that, no?
No, what the plan is to pass both bylaws, giving the mayor or fill-in mayor, and the CAO the authority to sign the agreements. So we'll sign both those bylaws saying the mayor and CAO have been authorized to sign the agreements. Only the MTO agreement is ready for signature tonight. So we'll go ahead and execute that.
Okay.
And then when the site plan agreement is ready, we don't have to come back for another council meeting because the bylaw with authority for signing is already in place.
Yeah, and that answers my question, because I didn't want to see us passing that one without it being ready. So it's
Yeah.
actually just giving you and the head of council the right to go ahead and sign it.
Correct.
I'm good with that.
The next step is we wait, I guess, with your permission then, if we're waiting for, Mr. Beakley, perhaps we could go with, Chair Jackson's approval, to an update on the planner economic development officer recruitment.
So in the event that some of you don't know, we were unsuccessful in our original search for a planner economic development officer, and we're going to be going out again to perhaps the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, where we can post a job there where the professional planners, look for jobs as well. So anybody that is seeking a job will get notified, as well as anybody that is a member of that also gets notified, even if they're not technically looking for a job but may want to come and work for us. So with your permission, we'd like to go ahead and post that ad for employment for the Planner Economic Development Officer. So I'm just looking for some agreement for that. The cost is $800 for a single posting, and each additional posting is $150. And your online will appear the next day and will remain until your deadline for response is passed, up to a maximum of 3 months after the deadline has passed. So I think it's important that we go ahead and post this job as soon as possible, so we can get that position started. Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay. Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Rieger?
No, it sounds like a great idea. Is there a deadline on that posting? Or are we putting a deadline on the posting?
We will put a deadline on the posting. If it gets put in the next day, we'll probably give it 3 weeks, I would think, and that allows people to have the opportunity to put their resume together. It is an extensive resume if one doesn't have one put together already.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, I don't think the chair is back until near the end. Is it the end of July?
Yeah, I'm not back until the last week of July.
So if we even took it to the end of July, would that be favorable?
Well, if we put it for the 3 weeks, if it gets out, by the end of this week or early next week, then we'll have enough opportunity that those resumes will be in. I would certainly like to see that we use Mr. Beakley again to go through the resumes and vet them and select the candidates the same as the way we did the last
What you're
time.
saying, that could be done
While I'm
beforehand?
away, yeah.
Yeah, well, and that was the only reason I had was I wanted to make sure that you were back before, but that process is the first process, and then it goes second, so. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. And maybe just to update you as well, we have found a successful candidate, and we're working on a draft agreement for employment, and hopefully, this lady will be able to start, sooner rather than later. So, once we have the agreement signed, we will, notify everybody of the name and the qualifications and whatnot, to let you know. But we're, very pleased with the outcome, for the Deputy Clerk, Recreation Cultural Coordinator. I think she's going to be a great asset to this municipality, and I look forward to seeing her here. Oh, you've talked to her and kind of, not yet. We're aiming for July 4th start date. So, obviously for the July 13th, meeting, she'll be introduced at that time for the press to see and all. Okay, so maybe we'll just take a couple minutes and we'll wait for Mr. Beakley. I know he said he was going to try to get here as soon as possible. He knows what's on the agenda, so I think that's best. Councillor Raker? I'm sorry. Councillor McLaughlin. I don't know why I had Raker in my head, just like, whew. Wow.
It's okay. I just couldn't let you away with that one.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, could we go ahead and do our council meeting and then go back to committee? Is that just so it would be done, or is that out of, I guess that would be the CAO's discretion whether we do or not.
We could come out of the committee meeting and go into the council meeting.
It's just, we're waiting, and I thought it's time we could go ahead and do that part of it.
Sure, because I don't think that should take very long. So we'll, no. Yeah. Did you want to come back up and chair this, Terry? Thank you.
So technically, I guess, like for the minutes, we really should adjourn and then go back in.
Recess, I think a recess, and then go back in.
So Karen, would you make a note then that we're recessing the council and committee, and we'll resume?
Save me going looking for it in there. Anytime. Sick here. Yep. Okay, we're going to recess council and committee and move on to our regular council meeting. We'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:25. And we're going to forego the prayer tonight, and I would ask for a disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we will move to the adoption of the agenda. Who's that? Moved by Darrell McLaughlin, seconded by Councillor Olmsted. Be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region adopts the agenda for the June 22nd, 2016 meeting with one additional item, resolution to apply for a Canada 150 grant. All those in favor? Carried. Moved by Chris Olmsted, seconded by Darrell McLaughlin. Be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region approves that the following bylaws be introduced, read, dealt with, numbered, signed by the mayor and clerk, and sealed and recorded in the bylaw book. 16-06-873 MTO agreement, Whitewater Brewery project, and 16-06-874 site plan agreement, Whitewater Brewing project. All those in favor? It's carried. Moved by Darrell McLaughlin, seconded by Chris Olmsted. Be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region directs the CAO to apply for $35,000 in funding from the Canada 150 Community Infrastructure Program to make park and trail improvements at the municipality-owned Little Lakes Beach Park in Beachburg. Christine would like to speak to this.
Yeah, this was in the agenda for June
This wasn't on the agenda, though.
No, but it would, that's why I'd like to explain.
Okay.
It was in the June 15th package. Somehow it vanished. It was in my report to be passed. The grant application Chris has in his hand, it's due Friday, it's ready to go, but I need to have a resolution authorizing me to apply for the money. As I say, it was in my report. There was a motion prepared for the June 15th meeting. It's nowhere to be found. So that's why I needed to insert that as an extra item tonight.
Any questions in regard to that? Councillor McLaughlin.
For some reason, I think it was discussed at the meeting. You're saying that we just can't.
My report was discussed, and the
Yeah.
and the resolution was in it as a recommendation, but the piece of paper is
Okay.
nowhere to be found.
And that's fine. I don't have a problem, because I remember discussing this before.
Okay, any further questions? Then I'll call for a vote on this resolution. All those in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Now, what have we got here? Councillor McLaughlin.
I'm just, and this has just come out, I know these trails and things, and I'm still very adamant that somehow we can see some way to get a grant or the county take over, because to me, Grand Solomon Road needs to have bike lanes on that road. It's just horrendous if you drive it and on the weekends and see the amount of bicycle traffic that's on that road. So I don't know if there's some way. I know we had spoke to see if the county would take it back over, to see if there was some way that they could go. So I'll just pass that over to Christine and let her speak on it.
I know that Bill had sorry, Chair.
Yep.
I know that our Public Works Manager had intended to have a conversation with Mr. Boland at the county regarding, what's a county road, how does it become a county road, how do we turn it back into a county road, how do we leverage some money for hard surface bike lanes, etc. I haven't had an update from Bill, but Bill's been so busy I've hardly seen him. So I will make a note to get caught up on that. There is more infrastructure funding opening up all the time, and certainly Council has identified that it's a priority through various discussions that we've had, so I'll make sure that it stays as an active file.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olmsted.
Yeah, just for Councillor McLaughlin's sake, if you recall, we asked Bill to get traffic counts and that kind of stuff for us, so I can't remember when that was a county road. I think you remember the year that it was a county road. So he was going to compare at the time that it was converted from a township road to a county road, and compare the traffic count then to what it is to current day. And I think they were going to set up a traffic counter on that road at some point.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment on this as well. I did speak to Mr. Boland in regard to this, and it didn't really get too far, and I'll be quite honest, what he said to me was, be careful what you wish for, because we've got roads we don't want to, just so you know. So we've got a bit of work to do. You can take it any way you want, Mr. Mackay. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Moved by the Councillor Olmsted, seconded by Darrell McLaughlin. Be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region adjourns the June 22nd, 2016 meeting at 6:33. All those in favor? It's carried. Okay, where am I going now? we'll move back to Charlene here, Corporate Services Committee. I'll give her the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beakley, for coming out tonight. I was wondering if you could enter the chair. I'm sure we're going to have a number of questions, and hopefully that you can guide us through this remuneration process. Sure. Why don't we just take 5 minutes or so? Perfect. Thanks.
Not much lately. Only one meeting is all we're allowing. Especially since our little episode there.
Well, no, I can't come over.
We're backing off. It lasts a whole lot longer than they used to.
Yeah, I passed it all over.
I'm even eating
You would be good for it.
organic bar right now.
About 11 o'clock. Yeah, well, I had to get up at 5:30. Not much were down, but there was $64,000 raise.
Right.
William Stewart.
Yeah. That's in our package.
Okay, I'll bring the Corporate Services Committee back to order. And I'm going to lean on Mr. Beakley to walk us through this, if he doesn't mind, so that council can ask questions and perhaps he can guide us on what decisions we need to make going forward. Thank you, Bruce. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Madam Chair, the report that was filed February 17, 2018. And when we filed the report in 2016, the data that was utilized in terms of content was related to 2014. Since that time, we've issued the data for 2015 and 2016, and that's the report that I'm to understand, Christine, is at the end of everybody's package. So you can, to some degree, reject the data that was done in 2014 and looked at in 2015 because you have more current data now. And as I had a conversation with the Reeve and council chambers, I said it's a good thing you caught your breath and you waited a while before you looked at this particular report because you want to have a look at what is the current terms in terms of how you compare to the other municipalities that are within the County of Renfrew. So if I was to walk through the particular report itself, and I'm not sure, Christine, whether or not we want to use my letter and correspondence or we want to use your paraphrased document, which would you prefer to do, Christine? So you have a report June 22nd, 2016. Do you want me to go through that particular report or my written memorandum that was made to council?
Whatever you'd prefer. I did that just kind of as a summary. It's a briefer version with kind of the financial totals.
Okay. So then why don't we use that document as a guide, reflecting that that document is a reflection of the report that was ultimately filed. Okay.
Sounds good.
So members of council, as you're aware, you went to a public process and you sought out members of the public to participate in a committee, that we weren't able to get anybody to participate in that particular committee to look at your enumeration. That's not uncommon, but the idea and the thought behind that is it gives an opportunity for the public and the taxpayers to participate if they want to take those steps to do so. That didn't take place, so the door was left open as to whether or not you wanted me to look at whether or not, I'm not a singer, whether or not you wanted me to look at doing the data myself and prepare a report, and that was ultimately approved. So having a look at the documentation and the data as it relates to 2016, there are a number of recommendations that still apply as it relates to the report in whole. So why don't we just deal with it one by one? And what I ask you to give recommendation is this is not unlike the last time I was before you as a council having a look at council remuneration. What you want to look at is each of the individual recommendations by itself, not the entirety of the report all at once. So what you may want to give consideration to is approval or denial of each of the recommendations that are made, as opposed to the entire report. I find that most councils like to approach it that way. You may decide that there's a certain content in here that you would prefer to table for another day or just leave up. That's the discretion of council. So, Madam Chair, if I could, I'll just start with the beginning of the report and make the observation. So item number 1 is the tax-free allowance. This is the whole 1/3 tax-free allowance. It's typical that all local municipalities, especially in a rural area, exercise the tax-free allowance. It is also exercised in the larger municipalities in the cities where you have councillors that are paid full-time. So it is one of the benefits associated with the Municipal Act and its extension. So our recommendation to you is the tax-free allowance is maintained and that there are no changes and it continues to apply. So to you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure whether or not you want to look at each of the resolutions by themselves, or you want me to go through every one of them and then come back to the table and look at each of the individual items. I would work at your pace.
I think maybe it's, CAO has prepared it as a whole, so then maybe we'll just go through it quickly or not so quickly, but we'll have some questions and then decide at the end.
Sure. Okay.
That's okay.
So then item number 2 is the annual wage adjustments, revised remuneration bylaw to reflect that annual adjustment with the Ontario CPI at a minimum, where staff have been provided with an annual cost of living COLA adjustment. The COLA will also apply to council remuneration the annual adjustment should be applied to the per diems for the mayor, reeve, councillor, and committee chair annually. And I believe in my original report, one of the flags that I put forward for you, you need to select on an annual basis what will that be? So is that going to be every October, or is that going to be every July? What is the target that you want to look at? Because as you know, the CPI moves in a given year. So when we look at the CPI looks at the 12-month period, so 12 months to 12 months. That could be 12 months, July to July, June to June, September to December, October to October. So as a council going forward, I'm recommending that you pass a resolution that identifies that you will look at an annual CPI, and that you make a decision relative, do you want that to be October, do you want that to be November, when do you want that to be?
So just to remind council that this past year, we did recommend the October to the October last year, and the increase was based on that for staff as well as for council. So I think moving forward, we would probably stay the course of October to October as the same as what staff is looking at as well, so.
So then the other thing for your consideration, when you give consideration to COLA as an adjustment, my role and my job is for you to give consideration to all items and all factors, is if you decide that you're at the bargaining table with the union and you provide them with a higher percentage, are you going to give consideration to this council to have something greater than a CPI? So that's just something for you to think about, right, as terms of a consideration for you. So if the CPI happens to be particularly low, but you find yourself in a circumstance where you've given the union a 2% increase, is that something you want taken into consideration, or do you want to completely lock yourself into the CPI solely? So my recommendation and observation centered around, I believe when I originally read your resolution, you hadn't set a fixed period at that time, okay? And I'm just recommending that you fix that period. And then above that, is it simply the CPI you want to look at? Do you want to look at something beyond that if you provide a greater adjustment, if you will, to the unionized staff?
Are there any thoughts on that? Councillor McLaughlin?
Well, I think that thank you. I think if I remember correctly, isn't that how we've been doing the staff increases? Is that
prior to last year and perhaps the year before, it was based on the October CPI only?
the last 2 years?
Yes.
Yes. Before that, we had a different practice.
Yes.
And I really, I kind of think that that's not a bad idea to go that way, but I think every 4 years it should be reviewed and looked at again, so that if you seem to be falling back, then at that point you could look at it, because I can understand what Bruce is saying. So I'm in agreement to do this, but I think every 4 years it needs to be reviewed. That's my thoughts.
Anybody else?
If I may make an observation, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So what the County Renfrew does, and I'm not saying you follow the practices of the County Renfrew so much as you're aware of what we do, whatever the way the bylaw works at the County Renfrew for County Council, is whatever increase is provided to the non-union staff is also then subsequently applied to council. And that's the way we roll it. And we don't necessarily always follow the CPI. So by way of example, where the CPI was sitting at 1, but we looked at our collective agreements and we'd given 2% across the board to our unions, we looked at that as an inequity that was happening for the non-union staff. So kind of for the non-union staff and for council, the idea and the thinking was what's good for the goose is good for the gander as part of the process. So that's where you might find yourself in a situation where if you strictly stay to the CPI, you might be out of line with your other agreements.